Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar, everyone. I'm Pearl Chang Esau, and I'm grateful to serve as the chair of Aliento's founding board of directors and to support the hundreds of dreamers and their families who call Arizona home. Aliento's mission is to work together with allies to build a place where human potential is nurtured and not defined by immigration status. I have the pleasure of introducing you to Reyna Montoya, the founder and CEO of Aliento. Reyna founded Aliento over 4 years ago after having experienced firsthand the trauma that comes from fleeing another country with her family when she was young and having taught youth like herself as a Teach for America Corps member. Aliento turns the trauma that undocumented immigrants face into hope and healing through the arts, leadership development, and advocacy for equitable opportunity, such as the ability for dreamers to access in-state tuition, a bill, SCR 1044, which is currently making its way through the legislature. Today, Aliento has been recognized nationally for its work, including receiving multiple competitive grants, such as EdLock for education leaders of color. Reyna is a recognized speaker across the country on issues of racial reconciliation, leadership, and entrepreneurship. She has been recognized by Forbes as one of the 30 top leaders under 30 in the US, is an ASU alumna of distinction, and an Athena Award recipient by the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. She inspires me and so many others to work urgently for equity, stay centered on our shared humanity, and maintain hope in the face of adversity. So with that, I will turn it over to Reyna to introduce our outstanding panel assembled today.
Thank you so much, Pearl, for all your support throughout the years. I am very excited to be hosting today's conversation from dreaming to doing, shaping Arizona's future with an outstanding panelist. Before I get to pass the microphone to them to introduce themselves, I want to provide a little bit of context about why is it important for us to come together with the spirit of cross-sector collaborations, from business to philanthropy to education to community leaders, especially those who have been impacted by policies around immigration. For 2 decades, since 2001, the DREAM Act was introduced in a bipartisan fashion by Senator Durbin and Senator Hatch. Since then, there's been 2 decades at the federal government, many presidents who have been attempting to pass a solution for the thousands of dreamers across our nation. We're talking about 2.1 million dreamers or DACA recipients who would potentially benefit from having a DREAM Act passed. Here in Arizona, we have seen that there's 65,000 Arizonians who would be eligible for the DREAM Act and could potentially benefit. When we think about our high school students, there's 2,000 undocumented students that are graduating our high schools every single year. Right now, we are in a critical moment where we have seen that regardless of political affiliation, more than 80% of American voters support a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. Currently, in this 2021 federal legislation, Senator Durbin, in a bipartisan fashion with Senator Graham, decided to reintroduce the DREAM Act this year in the Senate. And tomorrow, there can be an opportunity to have the DREAM and Promise Act that would support undocumented students and TPS holders through HR 6. So why does this all mean, and why are we having this conversation today, specifically here in the state of Arizona? There are very important things when we think about education and the workforce, and what are we going to do in order to achieve Arizona's prosperity, in order to make sure that we are all thriving as a state. So by 2030, according to Achieve 60, we need to make sure that 60% of our adult population have some sort of post-secondary education attainment. And when we desegregate the data, only 22% of the Latinx community has any type of post-secondary education. So this is timely and it's urgent. Also, when we look from a workforce development perspective, again, by 2030, it is expected that 75% of all jobs in Arizona are going to require some sort of post-secondary education. This can mean community college associate's degrees, four-year universities, or even trade schools. So this is why I am deeply excited and honored to have this wonderful and outstanding panel to talk about what can we do as leaders in Arizona to really work together for solutions and stop dreaming, but actually acting and doing to ensure our students, our state, our communities, and our nation are doing better. So with that, I'm gonna kick it off and pass the mic to Daniela Chavira, who is a mechanical engineering student at Grand Canyon University and is also an undocumented student applying for DACA. Daniela, kick it off.
Thank you, Reyna, for that introduction. My name is Daniela Chavira. I am an undocumented student at Grand Canyon University. I am originally from Sonora, Mexico, and immigrated to the United States when I was about 10 months old. And this conversation is really important to me because I personally have suffered the trauma that comes with being undocumented, especially when seeking higher education. Personally, mostly everyone knows that I was described as a perfect student. You can see it. I was 700 hours of community service. I was a two-sport athlete. I was a sportsman technician and volunteered outside of school. I did advocacy work throughout high school as well. I did everything and anything, and I almost was left slipping through the cracks because of my undocumented status. And I've won awards like the Don Carlos Young Humanitarian Award, and still my future was held uncertain because of this. So this conversation is really close to my heart, and I hope everyone here learns how to best support undocumented, documented students and learns a little something from our stories today.
Thank you so much, Daniela. I also grew up undocumented and I am a DACA recipient, so I definitely understand firsthand some of the experiences that you're going through, and it is an honor for us to have you join today's conversation. Then I'm gonna pass it over to Mayor John Giles from the city of Mesa, a city that I call home where I grew up. So I'm really honored to have the mayor with us today. So what brings you to this conversation, Mayor? Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, thank you, Reyna. And I just want to say we're proud that you are a Mason. I was just looking at my calendar. It was a year ago. You were the Grand Marshal of the MLK Parade in Mesa when we were able to gather and celebrate that holiday a year ago. So we're very proud of you and very proud of the leadership that you bring to this issue. So thank you so much. The reason that I am interested and passionate about this issue is because I am the mayor of Mesa, Arizona. Mesa, Arizona is 1/3 Hispanic, and many of my constituents are immigrants. I read an article a while back that said Phoenix is the number 4. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the United States. It's the number 4 city with regard to number of DACA recipients. Mesa is the 25th largest city in the United States when it comes to DACA recipients. So these are my people. We are DACA recipients, and DACA recipients are Masons. So I can certainly consider it part of my job to be an advocate, for these wonderful Americans and wonderful Masons. As a result of that, I have tried to do what I can to be outspoken at a national level, and currently I'm serving as the co-chair of the Immigration Reform Task Force with the U.S. Conference of Mayors with Mayor Eric Garcetti and Jorge Lorza. And in that position, I've had a lot of opportunities to lobby and to discuss this issue with Congress and with other mayors of large cities around the United States. And I can tell you that you have friends in local government. You have friends that are anxious to fight this fight. And we are going to be very outspoken as the Biden immigration reform plan makes its way through Congress. And similarly at the local level. You mentioned some of the legislation that's currently pending in the Arizona legislature. I and others are being very outspoken advocates of that as well. So again, I thank you for including me, Reyna. I'm excited to learn and from the experience of these great panelists, and again, assure you that I will do everything, the city of Mesa will do everything we can to advance this cause.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I was really excited today. I saw on the news that you, along many other mayors, included Mayor Kay Gallego and Regina Romero, signed on to a letter supporting HR 6. So thank you so much for your leadership around that. Then we're gonna go to Dr. Maria Harper-Marinick, a retired chancellor of Maricopa Community Colleges. She has been a true inspiration for me, and I am deeply honored to have her today in this panel.
Thank you, Reyna. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor, my pleasure to be part of the panel and have a conversation about a topic that is so important to many of us. So why am I interested in the conversation? So I've been reflecting about that, other than I've been a champion for DACA students for many years now, especially when I was a chancellor of the Maricopa system. But when I was very young, I learned that people had, some people had opportunities, other people didn't have opportunities, but that one element in common that would allow all people to develop the potential that they were born to be was education. So I decided very early on that I would devote my life, a life of service, to education, to teaching, to access. And that's the same approach I had at the community colleges. The community colleges were created many years back as a place of access to education for all people in the nation, regardless of your background, your status, your gender, your beliefs. So I took that very seriously as a chancellor of the system. And one of the things that made me a champion of this work is a quote from the Truman Commission. This is back in the 1940s, that actually the Truman Commission gave birth to the concept of community colleges as we know them today. And the reason why these institutions were created is because as a nation, we believed that only informed, thoughtful, and tolerant people can develop and maintain a free society, a free democracy. So why wouldn't the colleges be open to DACA students? Most of the students I met that had DACA status, people like you, Reyna, you're brilliant, Daniela, brilliant. Why not give that opportunity, and why not take it as a mission to remove the barriers and the impediments to provide access to an education that many, many, many years ago we said would be available to all people, regardless of your background and your conditions. So that's why I have done the work I do, and I continue to do that at the national level. I am now a senior fellow with the Aspen Institute, and I still devote my time, my energies to fighting for access for all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harper-Marinick, and for your leadership specifically in the education sector to ensure all students, regardless of their background, including immigration status, have an opportunity to thrive and to achieve their educational goals. Now, I'm gonna go to Todd Sanders, President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce.
Reyna, thank you for having me, and it's a real pleasure. I really thought about your question a lot, and there's certainly a lot of ways to answer why this is important to me, but I'm going to go back a little bit and tell you a little story. And the only person that knows this story is my brother, who, by the way, is a Flynn fellow, and he's on this meeting right now. And so I want to go back maybe a couple, 3 years. We were at a family reunion, and we always thought that our family lineage, the story was that my grandfather was from England and my grandmother was Italian. And I never met my grandfather, and I met my grandmother, and it sort of made some sense. Like, okay, that sure. Well, we were at this reunion. We were talking about that. My grandparents had both passed away, and we were talking about it. And my stepbrother said, "What are you talking about? That's not true." I'm like, "What do you mean that's not true? That's our family lineage." And so they said, "No, your grandfather was an immigrant from Mexico who crossed over illegally from Baja California." And what a surprise! And it turns out that he came over in the early 1900s and worked he was a laborer, and believe it or not, he suffered some discrimination. And in that time, he decided that it was really a problem to have his last name. So he got together with a bunch of friends and put names in a hat. And he put his hand in that hat and he drew out a name, and the name was Sanders. But my real last name, and this will be a first, is actually Sepulveda. So it turns out that my dad like you, Reyna, and you, Daniela, was a dreamer. He came across the border with my grandfather. And so when I thought about why this is important to me, it's because in a way we're all you. We all come from somewhere else. And when I think about what you've both added to our community here, and what my grandfather's passing from Mexico to the United States meant to our family, there's no question that this is an important issue, not only for me, but for our chamber and our community. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you letting me share my story.
Thank you, Todd, for sharing your story. And I was born in Baja California, so definitely it was really personal for me to hear that, even though that I left there at a very young age. And funny story, now that we're in the story time, before I pass it over to our final panelists, my great-grandpa migrated from China to Mexico, escaping as well a lot of the violence and the prejudice that was happening around China. And he did the same as your grandfather. He changed his name because he needed to figure out how to navigate the Mexican culture at that moment. So thank you so much for sharing that. That personally touched me.
Maybe we can our families can go to Baja California and discover sort of our lineage someday. That would be really fun.
For sure. And I'm going to pass it over to Elisa Dellaveda, who is with the Arizona Community Foundation. Elisa is a fierce advocate throughout the years around community issues, not only like immigration. So it is a true honor to see her and share this panel with her. So Elisa, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Reyna. And again, thank you to all our fellow panel members. My name is Elisa Dellaveda, as Reyna said, and I serve as the Chief Community Officer for the Arizona Community Foundation, my home for the last 5 years, and a place that I have found that really fits with my community engagement prior to this position and the many experiences I've had throughout the 50 plus years that I've been working as an adult. Community means a lot to me. So being at the Arizona Community Foundation as the Chief Community Officer really holds a special place for me. I will let you know that front end. Reyna asked for all of us to consider that question in our introductions of why is this conversation important to us? Well, I think we all know that the failure to pass the DREAM Act led to the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. And it was supposed to be a temporary solution put in effect through a presidential order on August 15, 2012. So Reyna might remember that I was with the office of Congressman Ed Pastor at that time. I served as a director of his Arizona office and for the last 7 years of his service. And some of us might remember that immigration reform, citizenship, education, attainment were always high on Congressman Pastor's priority list in his service in Congress. These are the services that he also wanted us to focus on when we did our community work here in Arizona. So we had Citizenship Day, which his office hosted for at least 20 of the years that he served. And over those years, thousands of people used that platform to apply for citizenship. We had volunteers coming to help and put this together, and it was just a wonderful thing to see. So when we started hearing about the DACA and that it was going to be available, and when it was announced on August 15, very, very soon after, we held what we called DACA Day. And it was for students that were DACA eligible, predetermined. And it was held at ASU in the downstairs computer room. And we served about 110 applications that day. And that was just the start. Going forward, we had this ongoing throughout. So Reyna might have known that. But what Reyna probably didn't know, that's part of my story, is that I grew up in a border town in the 50s and 60s. That was my experience. I was born in the United States, but like many of my schoolmates and the folks that lived in the community that I grew up in, they were largely recent immigrants from Mexico primarily. So there was a lot of immigration issues because not everybody came here through the process that was in place. There's being so close to the border, and at that time, border entry and exit was a lot easier and freer than it is today. So there was a lot of need for help. And my dad, as a little store owner that he was in that little town, that's where people went for when they needed help. They got a letter, they got something from the USCIS or from IRS. Back then it was INS. It was not USCIS, it was INS. So he was the person that they would always go to for help on issues that had to do with anything, but immigration was high on that list. I helped my dad in the store, so I heard all these stories, and that was part of my growing up. And you know, some of them were very easy, some of them were very difficult, and I heard the complexity, but I also saw what it meant to families going through these experiences. And that's the tough part, that's the hard part, because it's not one person, it's a whole group of people that are impacted by that. And in towns like the one I grew up, it's the whole community that's impacted by things like that. So that was my experience. What Reyna also probably did not know, because she's very, very young and I'm much, much older, is that in the early part of my career, I worked with Chicanos por la Causa in the early 70s. And I had an opportunity to go back home and start the first Chicanos por la Causa office that was not in the Phoenix area, the first non-Phoenix office. And I did that in 1978 in my hometown. And I guess one of the things that makes me proud today is that while we launched a lot of services and a lot of programs over the years, the area that remains at the core of the CPLC office in Somerton, Arizona today remains immigration services, because they were needed then and they're needed even more so now. The other thing that I thought was important to share is that, like all of you, like many of you, I grew up in a household where values were really, really important. The importance of dignity, personal, and the dignity of others. And the value of opportunity. Opportunity is never a guarantee, but without opportunity, the path to success is a lot more challenging. So, you know, all those values have formed my passions and my path forward. And, you know, that's why it was important for me. And thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you, Elisa, for sharing your story and for your commitment throughout the years for our community and for our state. Before that, none of us would have gathered without the leadership of the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership. I am deeply honored to be a Flinn-Brown Fellow. And just a housekeeping things before we kick it off with the conversation after these lovely introductions, we want you to join us to be part of the conversation. So you have the Q&A. So if you have questions as the panelists are sharing their stories and their experiences, please submit it. We would love to incorporate it. We're going to have a couple of questions that I prepare so we can kick off the conversation, but feel free to add them in the Q&A portion, and I'll be sharing your questions with the panel to make sure that we're including your voices as well. So thank you so much again for joining us. And with that said, we're gonna go back to Daniela. Daniela, I have the honor to work alongside you as an Aliento Fellow, and I met you when you were in high school, and I'm so proud that you're now at GCU. So since you share a little bit about your experience as an undocumented student, from your perspective, what are some of the common misconceptions that people have around immigration or immigrants?
Yeah, so with that question, there's a lot of misconceptions I think we all know in the immigrant conversation, but one of the main ones I always like to touch on is the terminology. I always like to acknowledge the difference between the terms, because I know right now everyone keeps saying like DACA, like in the media I always hear DACA, but we do have to acknowledge the undocumented population. Undocumented means they have no lawful status or nothing, is essentially nothing. And that's what I am currently. I'm undocumented, so I have no lawful presence here in the United States. DACA allows you to get a driver's license, a work permit, and gives you some sort of legal protection. And then that's kind of like the difference between the two. And within those two, there's different opportunities education-wise. So scholarship-wise, someone who is DACA or DACA eligible, which is something I am as well, but because the DACA was rescinded, I wasn't able to apply and become DACA. So that's why I am undocumented now, but I am DACA eligible. But scholarships, they make sure sometimes they're kind of not open or not really aware of the difference. And that kind of makes it difficult for someone like me who applied when I was in high school. It was always like a really stressful moment. And I think a lot of people need to acknowledge the difference because it's huge. It's a 9-digit number between someone who's a citizen and someone who's completely undocumented. And that draws like a huge line of do's and don'ts. Like you can't do this, you can do that, you can do so many things. And I think that's something everyone should be aware of, because like I said, I was almost slipped through the cracks. I almost slipped through the cracks because of my undocumented status. And it was incredibly hard because people weren't really educated on the subject of what it means to be undocumented and how they could actually help and support me. My counselor, who's Miss Marks in Tempe High School, she was very helpful with my situation, but I know other counselors had no idea how to help their students, and they were searching on like resources, and Aliento is a great resource, and now I share that all the time with other people, but a lot of people don't know that. They don't know like we can reach higher education, we can go to college, we can get post-secondary education, and there's that really big misconception that, oh, documented people don't go to college, they don't do this, they don't do that, and that's not true. Even as undocumented student, undocumented person, I have accomplished many things, and I can't believe that I have, but I have, and I'm here now saying it to make sure that people are aware that even this status does not define you, and it does not define what you can do. I know there's so many things that people will say, oh, because you don't have a 9-digit number, you won't be able to do this in the future, but that's not true. Reyna is a great example. She founded Aliento. She did all of these amazing things. I'm doing it as well, and there's millions of students out there doing it as well. And I think that's the biggest misconception of you can't do it, so it defines you. And that's not true. That is just a label, and what defines us is what we choose and what we aspire to be.
So Reyna, if I could add on some of the other myths that are out there. I think one of the big myths that I hear a lot is that when immigrants come here, documented or undocumented, that they take our country financially by, getting jobs that they're using and not paying taxes and all of those kinds of things. Report after reports really talk to this. I mean, no one asks you at a grocery store line when you're checking out whether you're documented or not. You pay sales taxes on anything that applies there. When you make any kind of purchase, no one asks you your status when you buy appliances or different things like that. So, that's a big myth that's out there. The other is that immigrants come to the United States to get on welfare and to get other benefits. That is so far from the truth. Even those who have status here have to wait a period of time before they even qualify for some of the benefits that are out there. I think it's a 5-year waiting period that many people have to wait for. But other studies say that comparing age groups and male and female, that we use 27% less of the public benefits that are available to us in general. And for the most part, if we're working as undocumented workers here, or even with the temporary status that DACA has, you're paying taxes on what you're earning. And in some cases, you never get to realize the benefit of the Social Security investment that you're making while you're working. So, there are many, many myths. A lot of them are on exactly what Daniela spoke about, but a lot of it is on financial information and the burden and all of these things, which are so far from the truth. It just defies logic, and even when good present information is presented. So those are two big myths, but there's so many that people that are coming in are all the bad people, the criminals. I mean, that's been debunked and dealt with, but people hear what they want to hear. And that's the story that stays with them. And it's really a sad situation when those are the stories that perpetuate and is associated with immigration and undocumented and DACA. And we never got to DAPA, but that would have been a nice thing to have in place as well.
And if I can add to Reyna, the other one, we work really hard. Obviously, I'm an immigrant myself. And one of the things is that because there are so many misconceptions and there's so many attitudes about immigrants, we work probably harder than everybody else and long in hours because you're trying to prove that you want to make it, that you can do it. Daniela, you're brilliant, you're smart, you're courageous. there are many Danielas, and we put the effort into it. You know, no one wants a free ride, and sometimes people make a lot of assumptions because you're an immigrant that that you're not pulling your weight as much as other people are. But that is actually 180 from the reality of almost every immigrant in this nation.
Thank you so much for adding that. And I think as we're thinking a little bit about like, what are the misconceptions, the myths that we continuously hear and try so hard to debunk through facts, through stories, we also have to think about, okay, like what are some of the best practices that are working? So I would love for Mayor Giles to think about how can cities, what can cities do at this moment to really provide accessible, equitable, and culturally competent information services for the immigrant community? So as you said, they can feel part of our communities. What is the other flip side about the misconceptions? What are the things that cities, in this case, can do to make sure that we're debunking these myths and we're thinking about the whole community, not only segments of the community?
Well, that's a great question, Reyna. And, you know, local government cities, we are in the information business. We are in the business of telling stories about what the good things that are happening in our community and making sure that people know what resources are available to them. So that this is exactly, you know, our sweet spot and what we need to be doing to contribute. I can tell you that being in the communication business, we understand how important it is to be bilingual in this setting, and particularly with regard to our communication people. So I'm proud of Facebook in Espanol, or Mesa Facebook in Espanol is wildly popular, much more so than our English page. So I think that, you know, there is some things that we're doing a good job of. Very recently, we met again as a council following an election and set priorities. And it's important for everyone to know that equality was really one of the core values that we reiterated as an organization and as a community that we were committed to. I'm proud of the fact that about 2 weeks ago, the city of Mesa passed a non-discrimination ordinance. It's something that's been long overdue, but it's something that I'm very proud of. And again, it's just reiterating our commitment to equality, our commitment to making sure everyone understands that inclusiveness, diversity, you know, these are deeply held convictions in our community. We recently elevated the office of our diversity director. And I want you to know right now that there's an office in between the mayor's office and the city manager's office. And that's where our diversity director is officed. And we interact with her every day on a multitude of topics. Just so that we are continually reminded that this is one of the values of our organization, and it's got to be a top priority. And if we're not talking about it, then we're ignoring it. One of my lessons that I've learned during the COVID pandemic is the reality of the digital divide. I have had, and COVID, as we all know, has very disproportionately impacted our community. The immigrants in our community are far more impacted by COVID than those who are not. I had an experience recently. I was at an elementary school assisting with some food distribution, and the families would come through and get the food, and they'd say, "Thank you so much. We need the food. We want the food." But what more important, or as important as the food, is the packets we need to get from the principal and from the teachers so that our kids can continue their education. Because, and for many immigrant families, especially when you shift to an online curriculum, you exclude them from public education. And so we have been working very hard as a city to partner with our education providers. Proud of the fact that we recently, through Mesa Public Schools, used our CARES Act money to buy over 9,000 laptop computers, so that all of our elementary school children, you know, have online learning devices, and they can continue to be engaged and stay connected to their schools and to the city and to the world. So, great question, and I assure you, we understand the critical role that the government plays in communicating, helping people be informed, helping people know what their rights are, what they need to be doing to progress and stay engaged as members of our community.
Thank you, Mayor. And talking about education and equity, we have seen how the Latinx community has been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, by school closures. And with that, also a big structural barrier that we see is around the access. I think, Daniela, you were talking a little bit about the inequities that it comes when you are an undocumented or a DACA student, when you're trying to go to higher education. For people who might not know that, who might not be undocumented, who might not be DACA, or maybe this is the first time that they're hearing that there's a distinction between the two, paint us a picture. What are the systemic barriers that students like you face when pursuing higher education?
Yeah, so, I think one of the biggest things that you're told, especially in high school, is work hard and it'll pay off, right? That's the idea, that if you work hard, get the good grades, get everything that you need, you'll get there. And that is not the case, sadly. I always describe being undocumented like a race. It's like an endless race where you're denied the simple right to breathe. And this is why. When you're undocumented, you're starting from behind the start line. So everyone's ahead, everyone has the resources. You're barely starting. When I first started my public education, I was put into ELL, so I was learning a second language. I was learning English. I was taken out of class while my classmates were learning grammar. I was learning how to read. And I was already behind, and I hadn't even started yet. And as I'm running this race, I'm running, I can't take a break, because if I take a break, I'm already behind. I'm gonna fall more behind. And I can't stop to drink water or stop to do anything else, because the minute I do, I'm behind and I won't catch up to everyone else. So it's this constant battle of trying to close that gap. And it's incredibly hard. And what people don't understand is, as much as I want to go forward and I'm doing all the work, I said I was what you could describe as a perfect student. I had the 4.0 GPA, I had the community service, I had everything and anything I needed to do to get to college. And I was getting rejection after rejection after rejection from scholarships and schools, because not only did schools look at me differently, I was now considered international. So now the statistics for an international student to get accepted were even lower. And I was getting rejection letters. Scholarships were discriminating me because of my lack of a 9-digit number. I was discriminated for having a high GPA. And I remember when my counselor told me that, I was like, I applied because I was like, I need money. I don't have it. It's April. I graduate in May. I have nothing. And I'm applying drastically to anything and everything possible and possibly open to me. And I apply to that one, and my counselor tells me that they would have loved to give it to me, but because my GPA was too high, they did not want to give it to someone in the top 10% of the graduating class. I was in the top 2%. And a really big misconception is that the higher the GPA, the more money they have. And that's not true. The people that are trying to get out are usually the ones that have the highest GPA. I had no source of income. I had no financial aid, nothing to get me to college. And for that scholarship to tell me that, I was devastated. And like I said, I did everything and anything. And by my senior year of high school, I was burnt out. I cried. My body gave up on me. Everything was incredibly hard. I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought working my butt off, was going to get me somewhere in life. And thankfully, organizations like the Dream.us gave me a scholarship to go to Grand Canyon University. And that's why I'm here now. But had it not been for that and the help of other scholarships, I wouldn't be here right now. I would have been slipping through the cracks like everyone else. And that race that I described, I probably would have been stuck in a ditch somewhere. But thankfully, I'm here and I'm still running that race, and I'm still making sure everyone knows that it's possible. And I know it's going to sound typical, but you got to keep moving forward past every obstacle, every hurdle that you get, jump over it. If you can't jump over it, go under it. whatever you do, like Martin Luther King says, keep moving forward. If it's running, walking, crawling, whatever you got to do to get past that and get past those obstacles and get what you want.
So Reyna, if I could just add to that, as a result of stories like Daniela's and other stories, so many stories just like that, different situations, but stories where people had the capacity, the ability, except for the financial resource to go to school. You know that Arizona Community Foundation now hosts a DACA scholarship. It's a gap scholarship. So the cost that a student would normally pay, the difference between that and what they're being charged is what this gap covers. So we now, as a result of stories just like yours, Daniela, and so many others that were, so apparent and so heartbreaking, there is a DACA scholarship that addresses that gap that students have that makes it really difficult for them to continue their education.
Thank you, Elisa, and thank you for the Community Foundation for their leadership to trying to figure out ways for students like Daniela. And I was a high school teacher. I don't know many people know about that, but something that was heartbreaking, it was to also see my students who were B students or C students who wanted to have a higher education. And I'm a firm believer as a teacher that your grade shouldn't determine the opportunity and the brilliance and the contributions that you can make. And I want to go back to Dr. Harper-Marinick. As an education leader, from being a chancellor to now being an Aspen fellow, you have a track record about hearing stories like Daniela and the 2,000 undocumented students that graduate our high schools every single year. What can institutions do to really achieve equity when we're talking about the undocumented community?
Yeah, thank you, Reyna. Thank you, Daniela, for telling that part of the story. So the first thing that comes to mind is we need to do a better job educating everyone within the institutions and then the community about what the institutions can do or can't do. So for example, even though I am not obviously with the Maricopa Colleges right now, I was with the system for over 30 years. Grade would not be an impediment to enrolling. The issue became when providing financial support in the form, for example, of a scholarship was considered a subsidy and a use of public resources, and the colleges were not allowed to do that, just legally not allowed to do that. So we had to rely on scholarships. At the time, there were not as many opportunities or sources for scholarships. For example, Elisa, I don't think the ACF fund was in place at the time. So it became really difficult to support. At the time was 2,000 students, DACA students, that's not including undocumented students, specifically DACA, 2,000. And the funds that were raised when I was a chancellor didn't go that far. It was only like $200,000, and that went pretty fast. But I think we need to do a better job educating people about what can be done and what can't be done, because just as we spoke about myths about immigrants, there are all kinds of myths about what is doable, what is possible, what is legal, what institutions can do. And we need to do a better job making sure that people have the right level of information, that everyone is trained to have the ability to have conversations with the students so that individuals do not go through all of the hurdles that Daniela was just speaking about. And then we need to humanize the students. I think that the more we tell the stories of people like Daniela, the more inclined people would be to open their minds and open their hearts to find solutions that there are many solutions, and sometimes people just get stuck in, well, we can't do it, we can't do it. And in the meantime, we leave entire generations out of the access and the possibilities and opportunities that we're talking about. So I think education is important. The level of awareness is important, training staff and faculty and administrators and everyone at the institution so that they understand what the issues are, they understand how to help students, how to provide that information, and then telling the story of individuals like Daniela over and over and over is important, because we tend to speak about numbers. And when you say 2,000 you don't have any faces behind that number. So we need to continuously remind that every time we use the numbers, we're talking about 2,000 people who were born with potential that may or may not be realized unless we make the effort to provide access. And then, since I'm not at the colleges, I can just tell you that right now, we need to fight with legislators and government and do anything that is possible to remove all of the barriers that have been put in place one at a time to keep people out of the system.
Thank you, Dr. Harper-Marinick. And you talked about the importance of cross-sector collaborations, and we saw that there was a problem when you were at the college. There was these brilliant students who wanted to go to college, and that opportunity was taken away, and there was not the infrastructure. Now we're seeing the Arizona Community Foundation, the Bob and Renee Parsons Foundation that are creating new pathways and scholarships for DACA recipients, yet there's still that gap about undocumented students. And when you talked about the generations of folks that were missing, how do we continue to think about when this climate, it's changing very rapidly. And as a DACA recipient, sometimes I feel that I can barely keep up and I'm breathing. So how do we continue to share these spaces of really fostering collaboration and educating each other about the limitations that sometimes having DACA or not having DACA can create within our students, and thinking more extensively about what are legislations that can remove those barriers all along, so then we can help even more students to get that. And speaking about cross-sector collaborations, I wanted to really pass it over to Todd. I know that you've been kind of like sitting in the back for a while, but as we're thinking about not only the education, Arizona is in deep trouble. Let's have an opportunity to really talk about it from this perspective that if we don't do the appropriate interventions within our education to really reach our post-secondary education attainment goals, we're going to be also in trouble economically, and we can be seeing many businesses going out of our state. As I was mentioning earlier on, there is projected that 75% of the workforce by 2030 will need some sort of post-secondary education, including trade schools. However, only 22% of the Latinx community have any type of post-secondary education attainment. And if we even go a little deeper, only 4% of undocumented and DACA community have any type of fourth-year degree. That compares to 48% of their white counterparts, 4% to 48. So Todd, easy question for you. From the workforce development lens, what can we do in order to close this opportunity gap?
Well, thank you. It is an important question. I don't disagree with you that our economic future, I think, hinges on understanding this. I think the first thing that we have to do is recognize and accept that there is a gap. I mean, that gap exists. The other part that I think is going to be really important, and this is an easy one, is that we're gonna need catalytic leaders. You know, the work that the mayor did last week, that took a long time, and that's not easy work. The work that Dr. Harper-Marinick did in the community college system to ensure that there's opportunity was really important. Beyond that, I think you nailed something. Just listening, for instance, to Daniela, right? Now, what employer wouldn't want someone like Daniela in their company? And so for people to understand the opportunity, we know that intelligence doesn't discriminate on zip code, and that we have an enormous group of kids and adults out there that can contribute to that economic success that you talk about. And it kind of cuts two ways. Your point about companies wanting to come here, they need to know that we have a strong and diverse, educated workforce before they're going to come here. And that's a really important thing to recognize. The other part is, if we want to keep companies here, we love to talk about companies like Intel that are here. The Intels of the world, that they can move. Even with a $1 billion fab, they don't have to stay in Arizona, and we have to give them a reason to stay. Now, the good news is we don't have outflows and migration. We have people coming here because this is a great place to live. And if we can catalyze around that opportunity and make sure that we're giving kids an opportunity not to end up, like Daniela said, in a ditch, but in a position where she's at GCU, learning a skill and a career, that's the win. So the business community, I think, recognized this. I think they have understood that there's an opportunity here. We, about 3 years ago, ended up in Nashville and actually collided with Chad Guestin and the folks from Phoenix Union. And it turns out we were there for the same reason. We wanted to know how to do this catalytic work. Turns out that we decided to do it together. So we partnered with them and started out at South Mountain High School. And I think that was really intentional because that is exactly the places where we should have started. And the idea behind the work that we're trying to do is to really align business and education so that not only are they providing the resources, but also making sure that educational leaders understand where are the careers of tomorrow, and so do kids. Beyond that, I think that what's really going to be important in this work is that we want to help these kids graduate with the credentials they need so that they don't have to get remediated. They go right in to a community college system, Arizona State University, GCU, or Harvard, or the career that they want. But we want to make sure that they have those options. If we can make that happen, that really starts to change the game. And we stop seeing people as a DACA kid, but as, you know, this is a really smart kid that I want in my company. That really starts to change the game and puts Arizona in an incredible position so that, you know, the mayor has to think about more infrastructure in Mesa instead of worrying about whether or not we're gonna have an anti-discrimination bill. And so I honestly think we have a lot of opportunity in front of us.
Thank you, Todd. And speaking about the mayor, what do you think from your perspective? What do we need to do to ensure dreamers and the immigrant community are recognized as an essential part of Arizona's future? And the reason why I ask this question is just because, as Todd mentioned, right? I think that there's a stigma. Elisa and Dr. Harper-Marinick and Daniela really painted the picture about the myths and misconceptions. We're thinking about the opportunity gap, both in the business side, in the education side. So what do we need to do? Because it seems that this specific community is not being recognized. Not everybody's taking that bold leadership that you are. So from your perspective, leaders in your shoes, what do they need to do in order to make sure that this community is being recognized?
Well, we certainly need to raise awareness of the critical nature of inclusiveness and diversity and the value that brings to every organization. I mean, I know what, as a decision maker and as a leader of an organization, if I'm looking around in a meeting that's making critical decisions, and if I don't see a diverse group of people, I'm at huge risk of making a mistake, because the opinions and the life experiences and the understanding that I need to make a good decision are not in that room. And so it's critical that we remind ourselves of that over and over again. I'm proud of the fact that we are launching in the next couple of weeks a City of Mesa Education Roundtable, where we're bringing all of the K-12 superintendents, all of the higher education stakeholders and leaders, the business community, parents, teachers. It's going to be a little bit of a crowded room, but it's going to be a city committee of 19 people. And it will hopefully elevate the subject of education to the same level as planning and zoning and transportation and water and infrastructure. It'll be one of the values of our community that not that the city is trying to, you know, elbow our way into the education business. Far from it. We are trying to be the facilitators and the partners. And again, it's important that organization and every organization in our city, that it's got to be extremely diverse. Again, if that's again, my job is to be an advocate for diversity and to, again, be advocating for those in my community that aren't represented. So the only way that's going to happen is if it's at the top of my agenda, and that everything I do is seen through a lens of inclusivity, diversity, looking around and making sure that I'm seeing a very diverse group of people that are helping me make good decisions.
Thank you, Mayor Giles. Dr. Harper-Marinick, I know that many people who know you and have had the opportunity to work with you, we know that you're a doer. What can people do? People who are in the nonprofit sector, in education, what can people do to ensure that this community doesn't remain in the shadows and is recognized an essential part of Arizona's future and present?
Thank you, Reyna. Give voice to the issues around immigration. That's one, that's important. Anybody can do that. I would like to commend and thank the mayor for what he's doing. And I think we need more Mayor Gileses in our community who make diversity and equity and inclusion a priority. So we also need the businesses that Todd represents to open their minds to representation on boards, representation among all levels of employees. Because being an immigrant, being bicultural, being bilingual like myself is an asset that should be celebrated, is not a deficit. And quite frankly, the days of having one person that looks like me in the room and then patting yourself on the back because there's diversity in the room, those days need to be over. There will be an opportunity for celebration when you have 50% of the people, at least, who are representatives of the immigrant communities in Arizona. So anyone can give voice, anyone can be educated about the issues, just as Daniela was teaching us what she has gone through. People need to reach out to people like Daniela and get a clear understanding. And then if there are myths in the community and you are in a place to dispel those myths, then take the microphone and speak up, because we need everybody having the courage to bring the humanity of the issues to the forefront. And we need, mayors like Mayor Giles that say, this is a priority, I'm going to be public about it, I'm going to stand up for what is right, and I'm going to get it done. So I don't think there's anyone in this community that can't own this and find a role to play. I don't think it's the responsibility only of some. I don't think it's the burden of the immigrant community. I think is a moral obligation of everyone in the community if we really believe that we need a healthy democracy and engaged individuals making our community a better place for everybody.
And it's essential for the future of Arizona to be able to have a vibrant, diverse, and prosperous state. Todd, before I open it up for the Q&A, we've been seeing a lot of questions coming from the audience. You are in a very important role within the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, and you get to interact with a lot of CEOs, and some of them are in this conversation. What can they do? What can the business community do in this moment to ensure that we are reaching towards equity and inclusion within the immigrant community?
Well, I think the good news is that they're there. I think, to Dr. Harper-Marinick's point, they recognize that having one or two people in a room doesn't qualify. That doesn't count. And that when you do add a real mix, there's a benefit there. So, I can tell you, especially as things happen this summer, there seemed to be a real awakening and a desire to move forward. I can tell you, we're going to launch our diversity, inclusion, and equity platform next week because it's so important, and we have a lot of support behind that. So honestly, I think the good news is it's there. The challenge is going to be make sure that we don't stop. Once we put it out there, it can't just be, well, we've done it, we can move forward now. So that's going to be the challenge moving forward.
Thank you, Todd. And we have a question, and it's open to any of the panelists, from Mayra Flores. She's asking, can you speak a little bit more about how COVID has impacted the undocumented community and the need to be addressed?
Well, I would just say, from our perspective, I love hearing what the mayor did. When we went into this in March and April, we heard from the Department of Education they needed 100,000 laptops, which is staggering. 100,000 laptops for kids. And so we immediately tried to jump in, but you can imagine that number is so big and laptops were so scarce that it was hard to do. So from my perspective, the digital divide got a lot bigger, and access to not only hardware, but also to Wi-Fi or internet was a real problem. So I have a feeling, as we look back at what happened to Katrina, the kids who lost that time after the hurricane, I'm afraid that we're going to see a big loss there for these kids that weren't able to access education in the way that they traditionally would. So that would be one point that we're certainly worried about.
So Reyna, I would add from philanthropy side, I think one of the things that we're seeing in terms of the numbers that are coming out, just as it relates to health outcomes in the COVID, communities of color, Latinos and African Americans are highly impacted through, as people who have contracted COVID. But there's a lot of other issues that go with the undocumented community. And one of them being that while many will qualify for a lot of the services that were put in place for to provide relief during this time, undocumented citizens, residents did not have that same opportunity. Fortunately, there are people who care and who are compassionate and who believe in a lot of the values that I think all of us on this panel believe in. And a fund was established here called the Relief Fund, and it is specifically exclusively for undocumented households and individuals who have a need to pay their rent, the same things that we all go through, pay their rent, buy medications, pay for kids' childcare, whatever those issues are. It's not questioned if it's COVID related because their jobs were impacted or because their hours were reduced or any of the issues that come up with COVID, they may be eligible, and we have trusted advisor nonprofit organizations doing that facilitation out in the community, because they're not going to go to a state agency or a city agency. More than likely they will do anything to avoid that, because many live in shadows, in the shadows, and that's not an awareness they want to create. So, we have a lot of generous people in Arizona, and we're very fortunate that we do. When the COVID-19 relief fund that was started among philanthropy came up, everybody was at the table, business, the philanthropy sector, and many others, individuals, and they all contributed. And there was a lot of grant awards that were made to nonprofits that were helping. But this takes into account not only the help that was offered, to those that qualify for and are eligible for services at the city, the state, or wherever. This is also an opportunity for philanthropy to support the undocumented. And thank God for that relief fund, because it's really made a big difference.
It has, and I can speak from firsthand experience leading Aliento that we have served over 600 families up to date with the COVID relief with $500 cash assistance. And we have learned that not only about the health outcomes, but the mental health toll that it takes on communities to constantly having to decide whether to go to job, having to potentially bring COVID into the household of a vulnerable grandpa or grandma in the household, since we see that the Latino community specifically lives in intergenerational households.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for saying what can they do.
It has impacted
Could I interject?
nationwide. And Todd, you mentioned how many laptops were needed. So let's just say that you were able to get 100,000 and get one per family, then choices had to be made. So students who are also parents have been impacted dramatically in terms of staying in higher ed. And this is a nationwide issue, including Arizona, because you make choices. So the only thing that went to online is not just education, is higher education went, jobs went online. So who gets the computer at what hour? Do you have the bandwidth to have 5 or 6 computers, assuming you are able to get access to them? So there is a great impact on who is today in higher ed and who will be able to come back. And that will impact then the statistics that you mentioned earlier in the conversation about the numbers of people needed in the state of Arizona with the post-secondary credential to impact the economy. Big impact in higher education.
Right now, on the topic of the disproportionate impact going forward, I got to tell you, I am genuinely concerned about the quality of healthcare that we're going to see, how this is going to impact the quality of healthcare in the immigrant community. A saying I heard recently that I can't get rid of is, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm. Some people are in yachts, some people are in rowboats, and some people are drowning. And if you look at, the numbers are making a dramatic, swing to the positive right now, but that's because the vaccination rates are doing really well. But I had a very disturbing conversation with an immigrant young woman a week or so ago, and she told me again how intimidating it is for her to come out of the shadows, and to seek healthcare and to do the things that she and her family need to do to protect themselves and to get the health care they need to put COVID, in the rearview mirror. So I think everyone on this call, I hope we can all be advocates for helping people understand that there's no immigration risk associated with receiving vaccinations and receiving health care. And people need to be, take good care of themselves medically and not be intimidated or or the immigrant community is really going to lag behind with regard to the progress we need to make in healthcare.
Thank you, Mayor. We have another question from Adilena Lopez. She shared with us that she experienced a lot of anxiety due to COVID-19, and she had the opportunity to access counseling through her insurance. But what about those undocumented families who are afraid to ask for help and are having a difficult time dealing with the anxiety? The question is, are there organizations that they can reach out and have access to counseling or speak to a therapist to receive the proper help that they need regarding their mental health?
I'm not sure that I can tell you which organizations provide that without asking, what the status of the residency is here. But I will tell you one of the things that drew me to Aliento was my understanding when I first met you of some of the programs that you offer. At the time that we were talking, which has been some years ago, we were talking about immediate needs, basic needs, and so forth. And you said something that has stuck with me. I'm not going to recite it word for word as you said it, but you said trauma is what people are going through. The kids who don't know if dad or mom is going to come home at the end of the day when they're home from school. The kids who have not had a dad or mom come home and are now, trying to make do with their new family arrangement. They need a space and a place where they can have some therapy that is helpful to getting your mind off of those kinds of things. I was inspired by what you shared and the program that you offer that deals with that in terms of art and the arts in general, which was really inspiring. So I refer people to Aliento. I refer people to those kinds of places because I think that that's very helpful. It's not just food on the table sometimes. It's how you feed your mind, how you feed your heart, how you feed, your inner self so that you can deal with some of these issues that many don't have to deal with, but undocumented households do have to deal with. So I appreciate Aliento for many reasons, but that was my first introduction to you some years back. And I know you're doing many more things now, but that to me was very helpful. And I think it remains something that is helpful to others. There are a lot of organizations that don't ask for that background. And right now during COVID, I think a lot of people are kind of taking little detours and making themselves a little more available. So it might be that some organizations that do provide therapy or consultation services are not asking that question right now about status or even insurance, because I know that it's become a national crisis. The rate of suicides is changed, it's different, and we're seeing a lot of young people get into that space because this is a abnormal and weird and awful time.
I would say to maybe organizations like Chicanos por la Causa that offer comprehensive services, maybe not necessarily mental health specifically, but making a connection with the right organizations. I know they're always willing to assist the immigrant
or Valle del Sol.
Valle del Sol.
I was just gonna say that Valle del Sol is specifically for U.S. citizen children, and they have a program for that, regardless if their parents are undocumented. But we at Aliento, we've been expanding to the work that Elisa mentioned. We actually have the non-clinical where we do arts and healing, because sometimes with the Latino community and the immigrant community, it's really hard to talk about mental health among many other communities. It's a topic that is very stigmatized, but now we have partnerships with clinicians who are bicultural and bilingual. So we do provide group therapy and individual therapy, and you can go to our website to find out more about our workshops. We do work also in a multi-generational setting. So you see grandmas and parents and little children and teens coming into our programs, and we have a workshop on Saturday. So definitely check us out on their website. I think that the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership will probably putting it on the chat so then you can have it. And I also want to suggest that the Jewish Family and Children Service Providers, that is also part of our comprehensive toolkit. So you're like, this is my first time, I want to know where to go to the Aliento website. We put all together all the partners there that are doing meaningful work around mental health. And then I think that we have time for one more question before we go into our closing remarks, because we do want to make sure that we're being respectful of your time. There were so many questions just for the panelists to know that probably won't get to all of them. But I do want to ask this other question around do you believe school counselors are versed enough to help undocumented students find a higher educational pathway, or is it the work that needs to be done on that front? So maybe Daniela, since you just graduated from high school, Dr. Harper-Marinick, if you can talk a little bit about, are counselors equipped to really find educational or even workforce pathways? Because I'm kind of combining two questions right now, because they started asking, what about those students that might not have the GPA that Daniela had? What happens with the ones that are gonna wanna go to trade school? What are those opportunities for those students? So I'm gonna combine two questions for us to really end up with that before we go into closing remarks.
Go ahead, Daniela.
Yeah, so, okay, thank you. So I personally, short answer, no. I don't think school counselors are equipped to handle this situation, like helping and best supporting undocumented or documented students. Mine, I'm very thankful that mine was, but most case scenarios, most of them don't. And sometimes, like AVID, I don't know if many know of AVID, but Advanced Via Individual Determination is a program that's supposed to help you get to college. I was in that program, and that did not do me any good because they didn't know how to help me in my specific situation. There was no checkbox for me to mark off. I didn't fit the typical situation, and there's definitely work that needs to be done on educating not only our counselors, but our teachers, because sometimes, teachers offer themselves like, I can help with your personal statement. I can help you build your resume. I can help you with this. And I personally have taken teachers up on that offer. And I had one instance where a teacher read my personal statement and she told me to, I quote, get over it. And I was just like, what do you mean? Like, I was like in shock. I was like, did you just say what I think you just said? And I cried because I was like, I wish I could get over it. Really, like if I could wave it away with a wave of a hand, I would, but I can't. That's not how it works. And people always have this, those misconceptions of just apply to become a citizen. Like, just apply. Don't you think I would have if I could have? Like there's so many misconceptions within the education system itself and within like their own perspectives on immigration and whatever they may hold. That's very difficult to like navigate. So I believe we should have like cultural competency training within all schools and really discuss like how can you really best support that student? How do you talk about this situation so you're not insensitive or like you don't say something wrong that may hurt that student's feelings and maybe discourage them from trying to get higher education or trying to get a job. Like I always say, like college isn't for everyone, and that's perfectly okay. No one should be forced to go to college if they don't want to go to college. That is okay. There's other pathways I know of. I know Road to Hire in North Carolina does a lot where you can be high school. You may have not even completed high school, but they allow you to get some training. So you can do like, it's kind of like trade school. They train you how to code and you can get a job with Red Ventures after that. And they're like amazing with doing that. And I know there's other programs out there as well, but the opportunities do exist. It's just a matter of finding them. And I know that's always the hard part is finding them, but get those connections. If you guys have any more questions, I'm more than happy to give away my like email and stuff and connect you with those people as well.
I don't want to generalize. There are many counselors that are aware and knowledgeable and trained, and there are many that are not. We all know that we don't have enough counselors. That's one problem in the high schools, and that the complexity of the information that needs to be conveyed to the students increases with time. So I think it's a great space for collaboration between the K-12 systems and the colleges and the universities and the cities and the business community to create the resources and the support. as Daniela said, there are many resources. No one needs to memorize all of that. There should be a repository of these resources that are available and may be available today. But if the counselors are not aware that those exist, then they may be the best counselor in the high school, but they're not going to be helpful to the students. So I think it's a great space for collaboration. I think that for the majority of the counselors, probably the nuances of what needs to happen for students to get on a pathway to higher ed, they don't probably know that because they haven't had an opportunity to learn about that.
I will say that to Dr. Marinic's point, you know, the student to counselor ratio is 905 to 1 here in Arizona. National average isn't better. I mean, it's 455, and certainly they're overwhelmed. And I think to her point, we need to do a better job of making sure that they have the tools they need to advise students as to what's out there and what's possible. And I don't think they have that. And then I think to Daniela's point about cultural competency, that's really going to be important, especially as, you know, for first generations family. You may be going to need to have la abuelita y el abuelito y la tía, that they need to be a part of those conversations. And if you don't understand, for instance, this culture, you're not going to know how to do that. And it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I see Daniela understands that. And so I think those are really important things that we're going to need to incorporate into these conversations.
Thank you, Todd. And I really wanna end with that before we do the closing remarks, with that spirit of collaboration. Laura Mitchell from just sharing the chat that the Board Reyna Parson Foundation recently established a $2 million scholarship fund. And guess what? Aliento put that, we created a graphic, we share it with our school partners, with our education partners, with our students. We're so thankful for different initiatives that are saying, like, if there's not opportunities, if the legislature is not going to act, if the federal government is not going to act, we're going to find a pathway for students because they're bright and because they're one of ours. They're our kids, they're part of our community members. And that's how we do things in Arizona. We collaborate and make sure that we all are thriving and we're closing those opportunity gaps. So with that said, make sure that if you are thinking about what are the resources for undocumented or DACA students, what are the scholarships, what are the culturally competent trainings, definitely check out the scholarships from the Bob and Reyna Parsons Foundation, from the Arizona Community Foundation. If you're like, that's too many to keep up, just contact Aliento. We have done the work for you. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can definitely connect you with those resources. If we're not the person, we'll point you out to the right connector and the right partner for you to make sure that you're serving all your students, all your community members, all your employees as well. So with that said, I'm gonna go back and we're gonna be doing our closing remarks, and every person is gonna have an opportunity, probably since we went a little longer on the questions, if we can keep it to 1 or 2 minutes. What are your hopes for dreamers, immigrants, and our state in the near future, and any other closing remarks that you might wanna share with the audience? So Daniela Chavira, kick us off.
Yeah, so my hopes is that from this conversation, people are more educated and know how to best support students. And if you didn't fully understand, well, please, there's resources out there. And I hope that you can educate yourself and educate others and really humanize the conversation around immigration. And really what I hope is that in our community, we don't let these limits define us, and that we create our own story, that we create our own goals and like reach those goals, because I really want to see our community do that and not let that, label hold us back, and not let like our family ideals of like, oh, work hard, like, or just get a job, or just do this. Like, no, like if you want to go to college, you go to college. If you want to get a job, you get a job, but do it for you. And you follow your dreams, and that's all you have to do.
Thank you, Daniela. We're so lucky to have you as a fellow and as an ambassador with Aliento. Mayor Giles.
Well, Reyna, thanks again for the opportunity to be a part of this. I've learned a lot, and it's been very meaningful for me to be a part of this. The older I get, the more I learn the lesson that by myself, I can't do hardly anything. And so I think it's important that we collaborate, that we all realize that, if this is, we got 51 people on this call. If it's 51 people trying to do something, that's not going to happen. And on this topic, immigration reform and DACA recipients, I mean, there's plenty of reasons to be very pessimistic right? I mean, it just the success has been hard to see for the last few years. But I got to tell you, I am more optimistic than ever on this topic, and on I think we have a once in a generation opportunity to see some immigration reform at a national level. I think we're seeing, you know, the faith that all of these wonderful young people put in the system when they came out of the shadows and identified themselves and said, "I'm here and I want to be a part of this country." I believe they're going to be rewarded for that courage. And I guess before I cry my way off of the stage, I'll just say that a phrase that I learned recently, and my Spanish is horrible, but it's very meaningful to me, is "Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres." And if we're going to get anywhere, it's going to be because we're all walking together on this. So I hope that local government, you know, and state government and national government will be good partners in this, and that we'll all get there together.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your collaboration spirit and also your heart, because that's what's gonna take for us to see each other as partners in this, because we all want the same thing. We want a beautiful and prosperous Arizona. Dr. Harper-Marinick.
Thank you, Reyna, again for the opportunity to be part of the panel. Thank you to my colleagues for your strength and your commitment to the cause. As we all know, collective impact is possible when individuals make the effort. So my aspiration for Dreamers, I think that was part of your question, is that soon there is a pathway to being documented and getting 100% of the opportunities to be engaged in our communities. So I hope that is in the near future. For those of us who are part of this and the colleagues listening, is, as Daniela said, educate yourself. And once you know, then you have a responsibility to do. You have no excuse anymore. I think we have an obligation and responsibility as engaged individuals in our community. You want the community to flourish, then all people need to have equal access to the opportunities, and we have the responsibility to work towards that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harper-Marinick. Todd Sanders, any closing remarks?
Well, first, Reyna, thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank my panelists, colleagues as well, for a great discussion. I would associate myself with their comments, and I would say, you know, I hope that in 10 years, like the mayor said, we're beyond this discussion, and we're looking at people a little bit differently. And so instead of looking at somebody as, you know, an immigrant or whatever you want to call them, that we're seeing them for what they are. You spend a few minutes with the kids that we're talking to, and I think people would change their opinion. And you know, instead of having their Facebook feed, you know, feed them whatever they want to read, which really never helped anybody. So yeah, that's really my hope, that we're able to do that, and that this next generation, you know, your kids, Daniela's kids, aren't worrying about whether or not, well, what they're going to be classified as, but they're thinking about, you know, how are we going to colonize Mars? You know, what are we going to do for that? And that's their challenge, right? They're looking at these other big things that we need to be doing, and taking advantage of all of the things that God gave us. So thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Elisa Dellaveda.
So I want to commend the mayor for using the word that this might be an opportunity for things to start changing. And I certainly look forward to that. Sorry, I turned off my camera. I certainly look forward to that. But I want to go back to my aspiration, I guess, for the state of Arizona. You know, everybody refers to Arizona as a very conservative state, but let's be honest with each other. We've also been a very mean state in some aspects. I was with Governor Babbitt's office when he declared MLK Day, which was soon overturned. And it wasn't reinstated until the state saw the economic impact that not having MLK in place was creating. Fortunately, sometimes economics drives the heart, and it should be the other way around sometimes. But anyway, but we've also done other things like 1070, Show Me Your Papers, Sheriff Joe, and Daniela talked about driver's license being part of your, you know, when you become a DACA participant, that you have access to that. But that wasn't what the state wanted. If you will recall, the state didn't want the kids to have driver's license. which is just awful. So my hope and aspiration is that this state will get a more kinder heart, and that through civic engagement, we'll be able to change some of the thoughts that are out there, change some of the ideas around the misconceptions that are out there, and be a progressive, better state for everybody. Dignity is so important, and for us not to afford that to our immigrant and undocumented residents here in Arizona just does not speak well for this state. So that's my hope, for this state to get a bigger heart.
Thank you, Elisa. And for you who came today, thank you so much for listening. Please welcome me in giving a big shout out to all our wonderful and outstanding panelists that decided to say we have to collaborate and we have to change the narrative, because there has been many policies that have harmed people like Daniela and I and our family members, but we have a unique opportunity in our state. At the federal level, Arizona can be a leading voice, where we're saying from Senator Sinema, Senator Mark Kelly, to our congressional delegation to say, we're gonna deliver a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. Our Arizona State Legislature, in a bipartisan fashion, passed SCR 1044 that would remedy some of those harmful policies and give students like Daniela, like my former students who wanna go to trade school, who wanna go to college, have an opportunity to pay in-state tuition. Now it is up to the House of Representatives to make that choice. Would they change that story about our state? And we have that unique opportunity for being a light and change from being an epicenter of pain to an epicenter of hope. And it is in our hands to work towards that collaboration. So we're gonna be dropping in the chat a little call to action, because we said that this panel was gonna be from dreaming to doing. So if you're asking yourself, what can I do in order to support this community? There's gonna be a link that is gonna be dropped off. It's also gonna be follow up with our friends from the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership in an email for those of you who attended, for you to be able to take action. It's a simple form. It gives you 5 steps. Maybe you wanna write a letter to your federal representatives and taking action about a pathway to citizenship. Maybe you want to stay more on the local level, and maybe you're part of philanthropy and want to fund those scholarships for students. Maybe you're a business owner and you believe that it's important to mentor those people that don't have opportunities like maybe other folks do. So there's so many ways that you can take action. There's so many opportunities that you can support. So we'll be dropping that link in the chat, so then you can take action with us. And it is a true privilege for growing up as an undocumented kid here in Mesa, Arizona. I would have never fathomed that I would have the opportunity to work alongside people like Elisa, who have been fierce advocates of our communities, all our communities here in Arizona, to be sharing the space with the mayor of the city that I grew up and I call home, where I learned how to drive, to being able to share the space with Dr. Harper-Marinick, who has been an advocate for education, because she believes education is a pillar not only for student success, but for community success. To be sharing the space with Todd Sanders, who is at the table with many CEOs who are saying, we're not gonna take a back seat, we're gonna make sure that we're widening the table and bringing more opportunities to make sure that our communities are prosperous. And more importantly, to have the opportunity to pass on my learnings to students like Daniela, who I personally feel that I learn more from students like her, and have that privilege to say, hopefully this is the last generation that is gonna have to battle the same struggle, so we can paint a pathway for other generations, as Todd said, to be fighting other problems, to be creating impact in Mars, in Arizona, or in our nation. So thank you so much for being part of today's conversation, and a special thank you to our panelists, and most importantly, to the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership for allowing space to have meaningful conversations on important issues that matter to our state, to our communities, and to our students. So thank you so much. And I am so proud to be a Flinn-Brown Fellow, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. And let's make sure that we're not only dreaming, but we're doing to ensure that Arizona's future is for all of us.